this is Lee back once again for another review, and this time I have a movie review. Yes, that's right. Now, I don't have any fancy, merch to show you, but I did see the Godzilla Resurgence movie, which, if my calculations are correct, tonight is the last night this movie will be shown. Probably by the time you watch this video, it won't be available anymore in your country, and I'm sorry. You have to catch it on video. But anyway, Godzilla Resurgence. Actually, when I went to the theater, it was known as Shin Godzilla. His shins were incredibly large. No, it has nothing to do with it. It means something like the real Godzilla or the true Godzilla. Anyway, I've unlike my Force Awakens review, where I kind of recorded it right after seeing the movie, after no spoilers, and I didn't see anyone else's opinion. I actually watched, probably 24 reviews of Godzilla Resurgence. And the reason they probably didn't use that name is because of Independence Day Resurgence, whatever. I watched a whole bunch of other reviews, so I hope they don't taint my, own opinions. But, I was a little bit spoiled for this, and I didn't really care because I thought, it's probably going to be schlock anyway. It had a limited theatrical run from, I think, October 10th at midnight until October 18th. So, in my area, I think they're only showing it tonight was the last night. So, it's probably getting out as we speak out of the theaters. But anyway, this is so I'll just give my views. Who cares about spoilers, but this will be filled with spoilers, blah, blah, blah. It's like The Force Awakens. Everybody got so, bent out of shape about that, but the movie was entirely predictable. Well, Godzilla Resurgence has some surprises in it. So, you know who you are if you're a Godzilla fan. I mean, most of the Godzilla movies I saw, I knew the whole story, like, way in advance. I was a little child reading about these stories, and then, it was a movie made in the 60s, and so I'm watching 20 years later, and I already know what happens, but, it was still fun, it was still fresh. Well, Godzilla Resurgence is a reboot. I think it's the very first reboot of the Godzilla series, because I think every other Godzilla movie ever made has always made references at least to the original movie. I think even the Roland Emmerich 1998 movie made reference to it. I could be wrong about that. If I'm wrong about that, because it's been a long time since I've seen that movie, if I'm wrong about that, then it's the second reboot. But most of the other movies, from Godzilla 1985 or 84, Godzilla, the 2000, all these other movies, they always make references to the first movie, as if the first movie happened, and then their movie happened. Because back in, the 50s and 60s, they had this long series. Every Godzilla movie led into the next one. But the funny thing is, out of all these movies, I'm not sure how much the box office has been worldwide for Godzilla Resurgence, but it's funny because the Godzilla movie that everyone bashes, all the Godzilla fans hate it, and, it was an overhyped, over-budget movie that was kind of universally panned. The Roland Emmerich 1998 Godzilla, that was released in the United States, that was the movie, that made a huge amount of money. I think that was the Godzilla movie that made the most money. And, Godzilla Final Wars was a much more entertaining film, in my opinion. It was very schlocky. It was a comedy film in all senses of the term. But it was a huge bomb, a huge box office bomb. It buried the Godzilla franchise from 2003 until 2014, when they made the legendary films Godzilla with the kind of crocodile's, mouth Godzilla that we saw. My criticisms of that movie, and I haven't reviewed it on here, the Godzilla scenes were in that, but there was only like 8 minutes out of like I don't remember if it was 90 minutes or 2 hours, but it was mostly about these Cloverfield / Rodan looking monsters and people talking. Well, fast forward to Godzilla Resurgence. This is another reaction of the Japanese Toho studio, who kind of basically gave us Godzilla in the first place. They have always been responding to the Americanization of their series. So, Roland Emmerich 1998 Godzilla came out. They came out with Godzilla 2000, which was schlock, but it was fun. It was much more in the spirit of Godzilla that I remembered. And it launched a great series, the Godzilla Millennium series. I'm going to get the order wrong, but Godzilla 2000, or Godzilla Millennium, it was later called by some people. Godzilla versus Megaguirus. Godzilla versus Godzilla. Was it? Yeah, it was Godzilla against Mechagodzilla, I think. Not Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla, because there was already a movie with that title. And then there was Godzilla, Mothra, King Ghidorah, Giant Monsters, All Out Attack. Some people call that GMK. There was Godzilla Tokyo SOS, which I think was less good than the Mechagodzilla one, but still good. Some people prefer it. Let's see, what else was there? Oh yeah, Godzilla versus Space Godzilla, classic, and Godzilla versus Destroyer. So, you had all those, and that was just a wonderful series because, you had the kind of the schlocky story of the past Godzilla films. You introduce the monster, then you introduce another monster that Godzilla's gonna fight, and maybe there's like a love story and, some side plots, some comedy characters, but the main focus, the main event of this variety show that we call Godzilla is the fight, a wrestling match between one big monster and another. Two guys in suits, slugging it out in some toy city. It's hilarious. Well, the Millennium series took that and they combined, a really good practical effects, suit with at the time was state-of-the-art CGI. And I saw all these movies on digital versatile disc, years after they came out, but the Millennium series was awesome. And if you look at the 2014 Godzilla from Legendary Films, and you look at this Godzilla Resurgence from Toho, I would say the Millennium series is superior in terms of entertainment value. And if you're a Godzilla fan, because you see the old monsters, but the suits, look really great. They've revamped them all to look, scary and everything. But anyway, enough about that. After all that setup, let's talk about Godzilla Resurgence. A lot of the things other reviewers have been saying on YouTube are pretty much spot on. This is a movie. I was worried when I first started watching it because I thought, oh no, this is going to be Cloverfield, and Godzilla's come for full circle and is now copying other monster movies. But it wasn't, thankfully. You do have a few early shots of, like a shaky cam, supposedly from someone's point of view, and they're running through the city and they're looking up and they see a big shape move by. But that's only like a few shots. Most of the movie actually takes place in boardrooms, government offices, and that sort of thing. And you might think, what? I would say this is the first Godzilla film where they really tried to make the human story interesting. They tried to make it dramatic, serious. This is not a comedy film. The majority of Godzilla movies are comedy films. This is not a comedy film. There's a couple of jokes. There's a couple of funny moments. A couple of audience, laughter moments. But for the most part, it is very serious in tone. And as others have said, you will be reading almost the entire film because I would say 3/4 of it are taking place in these meetings between bureaucrats, government officials, scientists, talking on how to deal with the Godzilla problem. Because Godzilla is attacking Tokyo. Surprise, spoilers. And it's in the Japanese language. And so there's the subtitles, and there's also other information on the screen identifying like what building, what department. So, if you're a Japanese citizen, it probably means a lot more to you because you'll know. I mean, yes, in American films, we're used to seeing Washington, D.C., and then it shows the Capitol, and then it says, President, so-and-so, and then it shows a guy talking. Well, it's kind of like that, but it's just about in every scene. There's a very large cast. And out of the main, I was just, going around, because I don't speak Japanese, and I'm reading in these meeting scenes, and there's basically what you have is, I didn't keep track of all the names, and I'm not familiar with these actors, but you had a young man in the government, a young a politician, and he basically does his own research and finds out that there is a large animal um, in, invading Japan. And basically, the earthquakes and flooding, and the whole movie. They were saying this from the beginning. Godzilla's always been a symbol of nuclear power and the nuclear bomb, and representing that. And he acts like a force of nature. Then he becomes kind of a hero. So it changes over time. But here he's a symbol for the tsunami and the earthquake that Japan experienced, and a lot of the government, the bureaucracy, the inefficiencies, the stalemate. These characters, they're not portrayed as evil. They're trying to do the right thing, but it's very hard for them to know what to do because the rest of the Godzilla series hasn't happened. And of course, we imagine in this universe they live in, we haven't had other monster movies. Maybe we had King Kong because King Kong came long before Godzilla, but if there's no Godzilla movies, no one could say, hey, wait a minute, this is like that movie where they attacked the monster. Let's come up with some ideas. Nothing like that. It's never mentioned. So we just suspend disbelief. There's been no Godzilla. Well, this young man, he sees on social media, people have caught glimpses of the monster. And this is where it kind of gets interesting because, yes, most of the movie is these bureaucrats talking, and it's dramatic irony because we, the audience, know it's Godzilla. Godzilla's going to destroy everything, and they can't stop him. Well, let's fire some bullets at him. That'll be a good idea. It's not going to work. We laugh because we know it's not going to work. And the army is not going to be able to stop him. There's all this political wrangling. This young man is like, it's a monster, it's going to attack us, blah, blah, blah. We got to do this. We got to let the scientists, come in. Because there's a whole thing about, Japan has not been a military power since World War II. They were stripped of their army and given only a defense force. So there's some political stuff in there. Another main character that comes out is this woman who is a Japanese American. She is a diplomat for the United States, representing the U.S. and their interests. They basically have to protect Japan from threats. And yet Japan is afraid that, once the U.S. comes in, they're going to blow everything up with nukes again to wipe out the monster. Well, this young woman, this and other reviewers have criticized this. She has a very thick Japanese accent when she speaks English because she switches off. And so her acting is kind of like full of bravado and swagger, and that's kind of, fun. But her accent, and you thought, well, if she lived all her life in America, surely she would have some American accent. So I think an American audience picks up on that, goes, well, why would she still have that accent? Not likely. But otherwise, this young man and this young woman, they kind of spar a little bit because it's mentioned later on that the young woman, she has ambitions of becoming president of the United States, which she could only do if she was a natural-born citizen. And then the young man, he's seeking public office apparently too later. They both look like they're in their 20s, but, in another 10, 15 years, they could both be world leaders. I want to see that sequel, someone mentioned. Well, anyway, let's get to the monster himself. He is the most developed character, and he doesn't do much. This is a very stoic monster. He starts out, and other people have said this, it's, spoilerific, Spoilerville, Population U. Godzilla comes out, and first it's just looks like a snake. And you think, okay, he's evolving. They call it mutation. They say, well, he evolves in one generation. They call him a god. There's this weird subplot about how there's this guy who exposed or discovered Godzilla. He has a completely new origin story. Godzilla comes from, he's some sea creature that, is exposed to radioactive waste, and he mutates. Well, Godzilla comes on the screen after you see the tail and you see some fins, and he comes out on, and he's just like, he looks like a plucked chicken. He looks like a turkey. He's got these big, people call them googly eyes. It looks like just these staring, ping pong ball eyes. It just looks like kind of a throwback to these old monster movies where they had these goofily constructed creatures. But it's jarring because people are screaming in terror. And this big thing, which, is apparently entirely CG. Unlike the past movies, they used motion capture for an actor and then they created it in CG. But, CG's come a long way. It doesn't look that bad. I wasn't expecting perfection. I've never seen a Godzilla, so I don't know what he's supposed to look like, except for the suits. for me, Godzilla 1984, 85, that um, Return of Godzilla, that's kind of the definitive creature for me. Or maybe, King Kong versus Godzilla's version of him. That's the big lizard for me, the big G. Well, anyway, he's not a god, but people compare him to God. And that might be a little unsettling to some of us here in the Western world because, people think of God and they think of, either they're an atheist and they don't believe that there is a, higher power, or they believe in there's some kind of benevolent, person or force, a good, loving, character. And that, but when they mention God, they're talking about it like in a vengeful way. So it's almost like maybe an Eastern mythological way, the more like the Greek gods, these, they come in and they break things and then they leave, and they don't care about puny humans. Well, Godzilla, this is just the speculation of some fictional characters in this story, so he's not actually a god. If you're offended by that, you'll probably be much more offended by Batman v Superman, which really plays up that angle. But anyway, Godzilla is just a creature that was mutated by radiation, and he starts out as this weird, chicken creature, but then he starts to mutate, and there's like blood shooting out the sides of his gills. He has gills now, like the 2014 one. Well, the military sends, well, I'll get to that later. He mutates into another form where he gets arms, and there's many attempts to destroy Godzilla, but basically, he eventually comes to the form that we all know and love. Now, he looks a little different. Of course, if you look back at the films, the Godzilla suit constantly changed, so he's pretty much different in every movie he's in. But now, his hips, his legs are very fat, and his arms are very tiny. He looks kind of like a T-Rex. But then he has a very, very long tail. His tail is like much longer than his whole body, and it kind of bobs behind him like a snake, like a snake ready to strike. And the texture of his skin, it looks like he has these open wounds that are kind of glowing, which is similar to Godzilla's look in Godzilla vs. Destroyer, where he's starting to melt down. And his body texture kind of looks like a burnt marshmallow. But then he has these jagged, very toothy mouth, look very scary, and then these bulging, staring eyes, like fish eyes. So the look of Godzilla is certainly scary, and they have the original roar, and there's some fan service moments where they have the original music from the early series playing. So the scenes with Godzilla, as others have said, are very exciting, very good. They don't disappoint. But if you can make it through all the story development, realizing that this is less a movie about Godzilla, the action hero, which is pretty much what maybe 2/3 of the Godzilla movies out there are about, and then the rest are Godzilla the bad guy. And you focus it on, no, this is the human story of how the Japanese government tried to stop Godzilla. They tried the military, it fails. They used the scientists, the peaceful scientists, and they shut down the reactor. They freeze Godzilla in his tracks, but realizing that he's still there, the remnants of him are still there. That's the movie. And I think in that way it's very compelling. So if you come in with the right mindset, the right spirit, you'll enjoy this film. If you don't like reading subtitles, if you hate Japanese culture, if you were expecting, a monster fight, you're going to be very disappointed. So, and I think overall screen time of Godzilla, but it's interspersed. It's a long film. It's 2 hours, and most of that is people talking. Maybe Godzilla screen time is maybe twice that of the 2014 Legendary films, because Godzilla was there for like 8 minutes on screen. So it's like, 16, 14 minutes, something like that. Other people have done the math. So anyway, there's no post-credits sequence, it just is the end, after the end of the credits. But I enjoyed it as a film. I would say I prefer kind of the schlocky, wrestling match monster movies with the jokey characters. So I really like the Millennium series, Godzilla, 2000 and onward till Final Wars. And I admit they all have flaws, serious flaws. I mean, one of the ones that people say is the best, Tokyo SOS, it's pretty much a copy of the Mechagodzilla one right before it. Very, very similar. And, Final Wars, even though it has some great monster fighting scenes, The majority of the film is just people talking and kind of these rip-offs of the Matrix with these, you know, superpowered humans, kung fu fighting. It's like, wait a minute, was this a Godzilla movie or something else? You know. So if you just watch those scenes, though, you'll be blown away by how cool they are, and then you'll wonder why the rest of the movie wasn't as cool. Well, so I realized that there's flaws, and even the original Godzilla was, kind of a schlocky creature feature. Yeah, and it had a message, but so did a lot of the movies. Even Godzilla vs. the Smog Monster was, save the Earth, be part of the solution and stop the pollution. And so Godzilla fights this big, massive goo that, skeletonizes people with toxic waste, which is kind of shocking. Well, Godzilla's powers in this movie, people talk about how ridiculous they are, but really, Godzilla's always been ridiculous. A giant dinosaur that, is 400 feet tall and shoots, atomic beams out of his mouth, his atomic ray. Well, in this movie, he breathes fire. He, does the atomic ray, the beam out of his mouth, but he also shoots beams out of his fins on his back. Normally the fins glow and then he shoots it, but he can shoot those too, and he shoots stuff out of his tail. So it's kind of like they've preempted any jokes anybody could make and say, well, he shoots it out of every body part. And he's just a terrifying monster. He levels a city in minutes, And people are speculating, like, well, could they have a sequel where he comes back? Well, of course they can. It didn't stop him before. But remember, this is not connected to any of the other Godzilla stories, so who knows if any of those other monsters even exist. But, this creature that comes out of the sea, it mutates into a dinosaur, and destroys everything. Sure, he could come back. And the metaphor is always there. We have this huge history of Godzilla. There's no rules for it. It's whatever they want to do. Whatever they want to use this character for, they can. And so, if you're a dedicated fan and you're upset about the canon being violated, well, which canon do you mean? Do you mean the Showa era, the Heisei era, the Millennium era, the Roland Emmerich story, or this one? So Godzilla Resurgence, check it out if you get a chance. I'm sure it won't be as cool when you watch it on the small screen, but, stick with it. Enjoy the story for what it is. A government, desperately trying to deal with desperate circumstances, a force of nature, a force egged on by mankind's folly, with toxic and nuclear waste, and, international tensions, the uneasy alliance between, the Asian world and the Western world, the United States. There's, some German in there. That was kind of fun. The French. There's all this stuff. So Godzilla Resurgence, not a bad film. But if you missed it, you probably weren't its intended audience. So don't worry too much. Give it a rental.